Both this, the glorious Model D2 Pro, and this, the Model O2 Pro, are remarkably similar mice. And seeing as Gloria sent them over at the same time, I figure why not take a look at them both in one neat video. These are actually rather interesting mice, namely thanks to the two stickers on the top of the box. The Model D2 Pro weighs just 64 grams, and yet can do 4000 Hz polling wirelessly, or 8000 Hz when plugged in with USB. Razer does have their newest DeathAdder V3 Pro that I've been waiting for Razer to send me their hyper-speed wireless dongle so I can actually use it at 8000 Hz wirelessly, but that dongle is actually a separate purchase. These glorious mice come with their 4000 Hz dongles in the box, so let's test them and see if they're worth grabbing, especially over that DeathAdder. I'll start with the Model D. That is the high arch design that's definitely on the larger side, so while my large hands fit it just fine, smaller hands might struggle. It's pretty high in the center too, so you will want to palm or claw grip it, although for me it's actually pretty comfortable. The side buttons are nice and big, they're placed well so you won't, hit them accidentally, but you are still, they're easy enough to access as well. They're well supported, pretty nicely tactile, and generally a nice feel. You've got plenty of space on both sides for your thumb and ring and pinky fingers to grip the shell. Not that you actually, particularly need to, thanks to the, distinct lack of weight in this thing. It's beautifully light, which does make flicking it around, well, especially at low DPIs, pretty easy, but we will get to that later. Build quality feels great. They've opted for a solid shell rather than the honeycomb design that they've been using on the last couple models, including the D and D2, which I think I personally prefer this over the honeycomb. It still feels solid though, even with a decent bit of force applied. The Model O, by contrast, is much flatter. It's also symmetrical, although the considerably smaller side buttons are only on the left-hand side rather than proper sort of symmetrical ones that might have buttons on both sides. The shape is definitely better suited to claw or fingertip style grips, although people like me with larger hands can still palm grip it if you'd prefer. It's much more suitable for people of all hand sizes, although for me personally, it isn't quite as comfortable as the D. I like gripping the D much better. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Those side buttons are still placed well and relatively easy to hit, although not quite as good as the Model D's ones. And you definitely have less space to be able to grip the mouse with on either side, although this one is even lighter at 61 grams, so you don't exactly have to grip it tightly. Build quality here is again good too, no creaks or rattles. As for accessories, both mice come with a USB dongle, which takes in the supported USB-C cable, which I actually quite like, at least as a desktop user. Since you'll need the cable to be able to charge the mouse anyway, having the cable just plugged into the dongle and therefore on your desk near the mouse for the best connection means that the cable is always available to swap between, rather than a standard USB-A dongle, which means you need both a dongle plugged in and a USB cable, to occasionally charge it. The downside for this is for laptop users though. Having this long cable with a dongle on the end is somewhat inconvenient compared to a tiny little dongle that can just stay attached to your machine when you throw it in your backpack. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether this is a solution that works for you. As for the cable, this is gloriously soft, somewhat pun intended, and just feels fantastic. I really like the cable. One thing that the Model D Pro 2 or the D2 Pro gets that the O doesn't is an extra set of PTFE skates. The default skates on both are on the smaller side, although they do glide just fine, but if you want some more surface area, these do come free in the box, although sadly that option isn't there for the O. Both mice feel really good in motion. Even with the skates, the default skates on the D, it still glides well. The lightweight makes it even, easier to sort of flick around without fatigue, and makes it quite easy to be accurate with too. Both mice use Glorious's BAMF 2.0 26K optical sensor, which is at least by name anyway, the same sensor you find in a lot of their non-high polling rate mice. Knowing that it's likely a PixArt sensor, it looks like the PAW3395 matches the specs, so if I had to guess, that's probably what they're using. Unsurprisingly, that sensor tracks rather well, and at least to the eye anyway, it doesn't seem to have the sort of suffering of the start delay that some of the older Glorious mice have been known to suffer from. At least in the past. I think some firmware updates have helped address that. Either way, I am working on a new mode for my open source latency testing tool, specifically the OSLTT-CS, although that's not quite ready yet. And actually, speaking of the latency tool, first, if you want one of these bad boys, you can pick one up at osrtt.com, which is linked in the description. And second, using the new peripheral testing kit, I can finally give you some hopefully useful measurements of click latency, even on higher polling rate mice like these. Both of these mice use optical switches, and of course, with that high polling rate, we should have very little click latency. For some context, a lot of decent 1000 Hz mice will generally return results around about 4 milliseconds here, as this testing methodology includes the pre-travel time, which, even when you're smacking the buttons, tends to be 1 to 2 milliseconds. So how do these fare? Well, when connected wirelessly with the polling rate set to 4000 Hz in the Glorious Core software, it's around 2.43 milliseconds of latency. That's pretty decent. The lack of a debounce delay and the high polling rate definitely helps there. What about wired though, at 8000 Hz? Well, the thing with polling rates, especially high polling rates, is that you kind of start to get into diminishing returns. At 4000 Hz, that's a new packet every 0.25 milliseconds. Even if you assume that you always miss the first one, that would average out to half a millisecond of latency, compared to 2 milliseconds at 1000 Hz. 8000 Hz is 0.125 milliseconds, or 0.25 on average, so I mean, that's not exactly a massive difference. So when you see that the average latency drops to 2.18 milliseconds, well, you can see there isn't exactly a super massive difference. It is better, for sure, but not hugely. And by the way, if you do want to customize the mouse, both for polling rates, strangely debounce delays, something that you shouldn't need at all for an optical sensor or an optical switch, and liftoff distance, you can do so in the Glorious Core software. It's reasonably easy to use, reasonably well laid out, and has all of the settings that you would expect, including things like DPI, different profiles, and the ability to split up the polling rates between wired and wireless. You can also do firmware updates through it when they become available. As for actually gaming on them, well, in short, I'm pretty happy with them. The Model D feels better in my hands, but both track well, are pretty fast on the reactions fronts, and the lightweight bodies mean that they're relatively easy to control, and for especially longer play sessions, that definitely helps, and just outright feel pretty good to play with. They claim 80 hours of battery life, although the different polling rates will affect that differently. But with how nice the paracord cable feels, and the fact that you get a better experience at 8000 Hz instead, well, you might end up finding yourself primarily using it as a wired mouse. In short then, I really like these mice. As I've said, the D is my preference, but the O is definitely a more widely suitable choice, depending on your hand size anyway. Both of these come in at £120, which definitely puts them in the premium price category, although that DeathAdder V3 Pro with the 8 kHz dongle is more like £150, so these look positively good value by comparison. Realistically, if you're in the market for a premium, light, and fast gaming mouse, either of these do look like decent options, and they get a good recommendation from me. If you know of some other options that you think people should know about though, please do leave them in the comments down below. I'll also leave links to them in the description if you're interested in checking them out, and you can also hit the subscribe button to see more videos like this one. Check out plenty of other videos in the end cards, and that's kind of it. If you want to check out my open source latency testing tool, specifically the new CS one, like I said, that's linked in the description. And I'll leave the video announcing it and talking about the new peripheral testing feature in the cards above as well, if you're interested. Otherwise, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, we'll see you all in the next video.